Hi, I'm Naman Sukhani from Think India HRC. So we are here for our first podcast with Mr. Kishan Kemu, President Kashmiri Pandit Association. Good morning, sir.
Very good morning, Naman. Good morning to you all.
So let's start by you telling us about the Kashmiri Pandits, how they originated, from where.
Kashmiri Pandits or Kashmir? Where do you want to start?
Kashmiri Pandits, sir.
See, Kashmiri Pandits is a community from Kashmir, and all the Hindu community from Kashmir today is known as Kashmiri Pandits because what has happened is over the years, that is the only caste left. And this Pandit term came during the Afghan rule because they were the only ones when Persian language became the official language instead of Sanskrit or Sharda. It was the Kashmiri, say the Brahmin community, the leftover community after conversions, which adopted this language and they became the office bearers under the Pathan rule. So they were called Pandits. Pandit was a term for their expertise in Persian language. So therefore they became office bearers and administrators to the government, and that's how this community was called Pandit community. Otherwise, historically, Kashmir has been for centuries a place of Shaivism. Then there was a period of Buddhism. For some reason, the Buddhism lost its place of prominence by 6th or 7th century, and again Shaivism took over and Kashmir became a Shaivist place again, and this lasted till 11th century. From 11th century it's been an Islamic place by majority, and then so many things happened. I think over during the next course of conversation we will touch upon them, but this is a rough background I can give.
Can you tell us how did the organization start and what was its purpose?
This organization,
Yeah.
Kashmiri Pandits Association in Bombay, is almost 70 years old, and it started as a friendly club when there were very few families here, and they started meeting each other, knowing each other and interacting with each other. They used to meet at somebody's house over chai and pakoda initially. From there on, they moved to having an annual gathering, which was kind of a Havan. The first of the Havan was in the Gurdwaras in Santa Cruz, and gradually the numbers increased. Then they decided to have a place of their own, and that's how this center in Andheri was. They collected money door to door. There were fund collection drives. They did I think fundraiser also. And so it took them some years to collect a princely sum so that they could buy a place of their own. And this place where we have an office here and a small banquet hall was inaugurated somewhere in 1984-85. And before that, officially the registration happened in 70s when two associations were merged together and registered as Kashmiri Pandits Association. As I said, it started as a club, get together, some people knowing each other, interacting. Also, maybe one of the important tasks must have been to find matrimonials within the community. How do you interact? So it was kind of networking that started it, and then the network became larger. And today we have two centers in Bombay, one in Andheri, one in Kharghar. We have a membership of about 1400 live members, and we have a population of about more than 4,000 families in Bombay. Community families.
Great, sir. Tell us about the history of Kashmir Valley, sir.
See, Kashmir Valley, if you look at the history of Kashmir Valley, unfortunately, Kashmir's history has been very well recorded, not like many other places. We have to be thankful to one Mr. Kalhan, who has chronologically recorded the history from I think 300 BC to 11,000 odd AD, and he has listed all kings from which period to which period he ruled, or a little bit about that rule, and also there are missing links also, but he has mentioned between this period to this period there were so many kings, but no detail is available for them. Before Raj Tanangani, there's another book which is Neelmat Puran, which is gives more ancient background about Kashmir. And then after Raj Tanangani, there are a few more historians. So basically, they write from 300 BC to today. We have all historically recorded things. Only drawback is Raj Tarangani is in Sanskrit and the first translation was by British. Therefore, there could be distortions at some places or misinterpretations which have affected. And because of which some of the dates or years are debated.
Not precise.
Now, if we look at the history, starting from we refer to Nilmat Puran, Kashmir initially was a huge lake. What is today Kashmir Valley was initially a lake. It was known as Sati Sar.
Okay.
Sati meaning the Lord Shiva's wife, Parvati, and it was a place because there is Mount Harmukh in Kashmir. There is Sati Sar, the lake. Mount Harmukh is treated like Kailash in the Kashmir Shaivism. It's supposed to be the abode of Shiva. You know, Amarnath cave is also there. It's also a very ancient cave. It has also its historical roots. So there was population living around this lake, but they were not very comfortable. And there was a saint called Kashyap Rishi, must have heard the name, very well-known saint. Apparently, then he meditated and he got a boon, and this lake was drained off at a place. But this is what the legend, as per Nilmat Puran, says. It's a mythological legend. Says the lake water was drained off at a place called Baramula, and the valley emerged. Now this is corroborating with the scientific evidence because geologists have confirmed that it was a lake. Kashmir Valley was a huge lake, and this water has drained, the mountain has broken off at Baramula, and water has flown out from there, and that evidence is still visible geologically. The land patterns show that it has flown out from there. The legend also says that what is called Baramula today was Varamula, and it was the Vishnu avatar Vara, which actually broke off this mountain, and the water flew out, and the the land emerged. There's another part of this land is that when the land emerged, there was a demon called Jalodbhav, who was living in this water.
Okay.
Even after the water flew out, he didn't let the people settle down. Okay. Then again people meditated or prayed, and the goddess Sati herself, Parvati as I said, appeared in the form of a bird, which is, there's a bird, which in Hindi we say Maina. In Kashmiri the bird is called Her. And the bird dropped a pebble on this demon, and this pebble grew into the size of a hill. And that hill is today called Hari Parvat. Hari Parvat, word comes from this Her, which is that Maina, which dropped the pebble, and this demon got killed under the weight of that hill. And on that Hari Parvat there is a very famous temple dedicated to the Lord Sati, which has a chakra on it, on a rock which is saffron colored, and there is a lot of background given. So this is the mythological or the legend behind this Kashmir, where the valley emerged, Kashmir Valley.
Very great, sir. Now, who are Kashmiri Pandits and how are they different from other communities?
Kashmiri Pandits are Hindus. They are not different from other communities, only the cultural aspect which is there. Most of the things are common, Sanskrit, all the basic things are the same. It's only little bit minor in rituals. There are some differences here and there. As I said, in Hinduism you have Shaivites or Vaishnavites mostly, and there are different places. In South you have Shaivites, in Bengal you have Shaivites, in the rest of the North you have Vaishnavites. Kashmiris are by far Shaivites. And the most, like in the rest of the country, Diwali is the major festival, and Kashmiri Shivratri is the major festival. So predominantly it is Shaivism which prevailed in Kashmir. And I don't know if I mentioned earlier, the Shaivism has been there for a very long time. There are indications that it was there for centuries before Christ. And then Buddhism dominated the scene, then Ashoka was the king. But Ashoka's son, who was there, ruled Kashmir for some time, he went back to Shaivism and started Shaivism again. So then it seems, historically we see till up to 5th, 6th century, both prevailed together. But thereafter Buddhism seems to have sort of declined in Kashmir, and Shaivism has again taken off. There is also a mention in one of the Nilmat Purans that there were before the present kind of people. There were, the historian says, in India also you find many places Nags and Pishachas were the kind of people who were living. So Kashmir was also like on the borders of this lake there were Nags. There's one mention, they says that the Nags threw boulders from the mountains and destroyed the Buddhist vihars. And the Nags and Brahmins had this agreement where the Nil Nag, who was the king of Nags, he laid down guidelines to follow, and then thereafter those guidelines were accepted and followed, and peace prevailed and both settled down peacefully. And those guidelines are kind of rituals which are to be followed, which is Nilmat Quran mentions those rituals which have been agreed upon, and that's what Kashmiris follow. Now, when we talk about Nags, it's a word which has two meanings in Kashmir. A snake is also called a Nag, and a spring is also called a Nag. So most of the water springs are Nags, and the snakes are also called Nags. So what was the connection? I won't be sure, but it probably has to do with the snake king of the time. But the people were also called Nagas. Perhaps there was some following of the Nagas, whatever it was, the tribe or whatever it was. It's before the present cultural change. It was the Nags which were, before this people settling down, it was the Nags which were living on the borders of that lake.
Tell us about the genocides that happened in Kashmir Valley over the years.
There have been many genocides. You see, Kashmir Valley till 1032 or 38, 1148. Sorry, it was 1038, I think. Okay. Has had entire Hindu rule. It's been a Hindu kingdom.
Okay.
It is around that time the Islamic rule started. Okay. Now, what happened was, perhaps the golden period in the Kashmir history was between 8th and 10th century. Because in 7th, 8th century we have a king called Lalitaditya Muktapir, who was a great king, also known as Alexander of East, because he ruled half of India, right from Bengal to Afghanistan and beyond. And he had also won over some territories which were later part of Soviet Union. And for 12 years he conquered most of these places. And he is the one who completed the famous Mardhan Sun temple, and also it is during his period, it seems, the Sharda Peeth, which was a very famous temple and university in which is under now Pakistan occupied Kashmir, were completed. Now he was a very strong king, and that time Kashmir was a very strong empire. Thereafter he was followed by another dynasty called Utpal dynasty, and they also, a lot of development happened during that time, but somewhere around 10th century afterwards there has been a decline, a severe decline, conspiracies, and it became easy for, in fact, the small incursions had been happening, and then there was one chap called Rinchan who was from Tibet, who joined one of the kingdoms, and then by way of a conspiracy killed that king and became the ruler himself. And this Rinchan, who was a Buddhist from Tibet, then converted to Islam. And then he was followed by another Muslim king, and then the first Sultanate rule, which is the first Muslim rule, started from 1030 something. Thereafter there have been many rules. I mean, this continued up to the independence, up to the Sikh rule, which happened later on. But now, the first exodus happened during the kingdom of Sikandar Bhutshikan. Bhutshikan means idol breaker. There was a king called Sikandar, and he apparently took the onus on himself to finish Hinduism from Kashmir, and he boasted about it, that he has finished Hinduism, and he destroyed most of these temples. This Mardhan Sun temple, it took him a year to break it. It didn't break. It was such a great temple. Then he used fire to destroy it. Then there were temples there were lots of temples which he broke, and some of the stones of those temples he used as foundation stones for various mosques and various structures. So, and he announced that he had finished Hinduism from Kashmir. This was the first exodus. The second exodus, there have been 6 exodus between then and 1990 before that. This is the seventh Exodus. Then second happened during the rule of Chucks. Then there was one during Mughal period, which was during Aurangzeb's time, because when he again persecuted. Then there was one during the Afghan period, which is supposed to be the worst period, because that time the persecutions were very severe, and it is that time again many people left, the population became small, and that's why only the Brahmins were left. All that were either converted or killed, and people have been killed in thousands. I mean, not thousands, lakhs. Torture. During Afghan period, they used to play games. It's mentioned again in the history of that time that they used to tie up Brahmins, put them under Dal Lake with a filth bag on their head, and people would throw stones. This would break, and all the filth would fall on, cover their eyes, and finally they would drown and die. There is an incident where number of Brahmins killed, and then the thread was burnt, and that thread which was burnt weighed more than 40 kgs. So it's not mentioned how many were killed, but the weight of the thread that was burnt was more than 40 kgs, and thread doesn't weigh a few grams also.
That indicates how many.
So you can draw an inference how many would have been killed in that instant. So like this, there are 6 exoduses. The last was I will refer to the fifth and sixth. Fifth happened in 1931 when there was the first communal riot in Kashmir, and it was instigated by the British against the Maharaja. See, British had a problem with the Maharaja of J&K, who was Maharaja Hari Singh, because they wanted, it was an independent kingdom sold, and he had bought it, his grandfather had bought it, but they wanted it as a proxy. So he did not agree on certain things, so they started creating trouble. And this riot happened in 1931. It happened because there was a person who was a cook of one of the British officers who was not from Kashmir. He had come to Kashmir. There was a Muslim United Front meeting or something, and he made a very vociferous speech, instigating speech, and incited people. So he was arrested, and there was a legal process. He was arrested and inquiry against him, but people protested. They wanted him released, and the investigation was shifted to the court, also to the jail where he was. People charged into the jail. There was fighting. Some people died, and in that process, then there were riots, and a lot of Hindu shops were looted, burnt. And this is the first anti-Hindu riot which happened in Kashmir, led to another exodus. This was in 1931. The next was in 1947. In 47, there was this attack from Pakistan, which is known as Kabali attack. Kabali means tribesmen, and it was actually Pakistani army disguised as tribesmen, and also tribesmen who were sent to Kashmir to annex Kashmir from India. But because this was because Maharaja had dilly-dallied in signing the instrument of accession. He was still debating whether he should join or not, or be independent, and Pakistan pushed it. There was some revolt in the border areas, because the Maharaja's army in the border areas had his own army. Some of them was local, and they revolted and joined Pakistan. Again, religion played a part, and they killed their officers. So ultimately, Maharaja was on a weak wicket. Then he joined instrument of accession with India, and Indian army landed in Srinagar and pushed them back. And that's where, when they were pushing them back, the process was still on. About that time, Prime Minister Nehru seems to have made a blunder of going to United Nations, and that is the source of a dispute since then. And the half of the Kashmir remained with Pakistan, and is called POK today. This and from 1947 to 1990, there was some kind of exodus which was continuing, in the sense, because thereafter the democracy became, India was a democratic country, which means ruled by the majority, and the majority was again, let's say, Muslim. Sheikh Abdullah was the chief minister most of the time. He started misbehaving. He was put behind bars by Nehru. Then there were other governments. So off and on these things used to happen. And a bias came in the administration. Most of the rules were formed which were sort of anti-minority, and minority there was Hindus, though they had no minority status. And therefore, gradual exodus was happening. And finally, the last exodus, which is what we call today the seventh exodus, which happened in 1990, which was completely a different thing altogether.
There are many politicians and journalists who like to use the word Kashmiriyat. Can you put some light on what is Kashmiriyat?
Kashmirian is a word which is often used, abused, misused for anybody for his own convenience. It is generally referred to as a term which was Sufism.
Sufi.
See, Kashmir is also known as a place. Kashmir has been traditionally known as Reshwar. Reshwar means the garden of saints. Rishi is a saint, and War means a garden. Because Kashmir has traditionally has this culture of sainthood over centuries. It's been a spiritual place of spiritual learning. Like I said, Kashmir Shaivism. Abhinav Gupta is a very well-known person who wrote so many things and it was a center of learning at Sharda, as I said, university, temple, great place. And when Muslim invasions and Muslim rule happened, there also the conversions were not easy. So during the first 50 years, there was an influx of Sufis from Persia who used soft tools to convert. So, on the one hand, from the government, there was harder mechanism, the Sufis were softer versions. So, they were the saints and the softer models who laid down guidelines and rules and were in part of the kings. So, there the term sort of was more peaceful. It was like peaceful coexistence of Kashmiris, Hindus, Muslims, others, etc. And that is what the term got used, actually started from their Kashmirians. But it was more of a political tool. To me, it made no sense ever because there was no Kashmiriyat in place. It was only a narrative. I will call it a narrative.
Were Hurriyat members involved in Kashmiri Pandits genocide? Like who were the Hurriyat members?
See, Hurriyat Conference was a party of separatists, most of them. Whether they were directly involved in genocide or not is difficult to say because nobody can confirm who was directly involved. But when this genocide happened in 1990, that time it appeared almost everyone was involved. If you go into details, now Hurriyat would be more than others because they were a hardcore Pakistan-backed, Pakistan-supported organization and members. And this genocide was completely at the instigation of Pakistan. There was direct, indirect, monetary, arms, all support from there. So you definitely can say Hurriyat would have had a role indirect because Hurriyat, without openly saying it, by their all actions they were towards Kashmir merging with becoming part of Pakistan, not of India.
The main motive was...
Therefore, Hurriyat was the least trustworthy. Why Hurriyat was allowed to grow, was supported and have free access to Pakistan is a question that needs to be answered because for years they had free access to Pakistan. Money was flowing freely from ISI agents from USA, UK and other places to their accounts and they were actually supporting the militants. Openly, some of the leaders may not have been part of the cause of the genocide, but indirectly they were. When you are supporting militants, militants were doing this.
What are some narratives people are trying to create on recent Kashmiri Pandit genocide?
See, the unfortunate part is these narratives have played a political role from various angles. Now, it is being used as and when it suited people and depending on the situation. The first narrative in 1990 when Exodus happened which came from the valley but was part of a strategy, was that the local leaders from Kashmir would say, we did not ask them to go, we wanted them here, they are part and parcel of us. It is Mr. Jagmohan who asked them to shoot because he wanted to crack down on us, which is a big lie because Jagmohan wasn't there in Kashmir on 19 January at all. So one has to know history before that. And this genocide which happened 90 didn't happen overnight. I have said it in other places also. The process probably started in 70s initially and took effect, visible effect from 84, at least to me. I wasn't in Kashmir at that time, but I could see, I was in Calcutta in 84, I could see something has changed. It was an India-West Indies cricket match. I was watching on TV and I saw people supporting West Indies, throwing stones at Indian team and abusing Indian team. And both the Indian team was looking shattered, what is happening? Whether they were playing in India or they were playing somewhere else. And I mean, there had been matches before that. I had watched myself as a student. It wasn't like this. So after the match, there was a small bomb blast. The question I have always wondered is between 84 and 90, there were many incidents of the small arm fire, small bomb blast, but not one person was arrested. How is it possible? Because if action had been taken, it wouldn't have grown so much.
Yeah.
That is because between 84 and 90, no action was taken. From 87 to 90, this accelerated, this movement of terrorism accelerated. And there were various causes, various incentives for that. It was between 87 and 90, there was a large game which took place. And there were many reasons to that. If you want to know, because there was politics also, which perhaps added to it, which is again a narrative, because one of the narratives also you would have heard is in 87 the election was rigged.
Yeah.
Okay, and therefore those who lost, they became terrorists, which is justification, which cannot, because elections used to be rigged. No, can anyone tell me the elections in Bihar, Bengal, UP were not rigged? In many parts, Bengal I have seen, nobody knew what was happening in the 80s. So how come there were no terrorists from there, only from Kashmir? So this logic doesn't make sense. It's a narrative. But the fact is, there is also a conspiracy which I have been saying because between 84 and 90, I said, why no action? Between 87 to 90, people used to freely cross the border. Freely. I'm told the buses used to start from Srinagar, they would announce Sopore, Kapur and Apur. Apur means across the border.
Okay.
And people used to go. And they were getting money, they were getting training, and they were getting arms.
All kind of stuff.
Now, I will debunk this this narrative again, because when at that time I had been to Kashmir in 87, and Kashmir was already hot. Hot meaning a common Kashmiri knew something is happening. The friends, my school friends which I met there, they knew something is happening underground. People are crossing the border freely, they are coming back with arms, no action is being taken. Now this was a mystery, how come? And these ammunitions were being brought and dumps were being created. Finally it exploded in 90 is when the action took place. But the preparation was on a large scale between 87 and 90. When I said 70, it is because the Jamaat-e-Islami culture and their youth wing, Jamaat-ul-Tulba and the madrasas, that started from 70. And in madrasas the training was such. I was talking to somebody who told me, in madrasas what were we taught? He says, we were taught like this. We say K for kingo in English.
Yeah.
In Urdu there's a word kif. He says we were taught kif for kafir. This is how we were taught. And right from the first standard, like K for kafir. And kafir means enemy, kill.
Yeah.
So this is, the education system was corrupted. And it happened in Pakistan and it happened in India at the same time. Because Jamaat-e-Islami became evident. Then the other narrative in the 90s or 2000s was this, when the movement, you see, it's the terrorism started with a party called Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front first, JKLF, which wanted independence of Kashmir. Later on they were eliminated and there were other hard organizations brought in by Pakistan, Hizbul Mujahideen, Harkatul Ansar and things like that, which were all Pakistan supported, Pakistan elements, and they were for pro-Pakistan. And the Afghanistan invasion happened, hardcore terrorist jihadis from Afghan, because once Soviet Union quit Afghanistan, all the infrastructure which had been laid for Afghanistan, they started diverting that to India, and that's where those massacres happened. In the late 90s and 2000s, you will find a lot of massacres happened. large-scale massacres, and many of them were where the terrorists were wearing the Indian Army fatigues. And the narrative was, narrative is the Indian Army which was doing it and blaming it on terrorists. This was another narrative there. The last narrative I have seen after Kashmir Files. The Kashmir Files movie became a big hit, and the narrative in Kashmir was, things have returned to normal. It is because of Kashmir Files now things have gone out of hand. How can Kashmir Files cause killings? Even Mr. Farooq Abdullah made a statement. I have been telling government of India to ban for Kashmir Files because these killings are happening because of that. Now, what is the link of Kashmir Files to killing? What did Kashmir Files do? Kashmir Files only narrated the story of Kashmiri Pandits, what happened to them before and after 1990. It was a movie focused on Exodus of 1990, and it was a very factual, research-driven movie, because I know Vivek Agnihotri approached every association, he approached us also. He has interviewed some people in this office, those who had experienced the 1990 Exodus. There were people interviewed in this office. And he's collected 700 odd videos and then converted them into a story and put it. It's a very factual story. So where is the question of? The narrative, how it spreads is, I was in Kashmir about a year back. I had gone last year, I think. And even the porter is telling me, sir, things have become normal. But after Kashmir Files, things have gone out of control. I asked him, how did Kashmir Files change? No, the government is supporting Kashmir Files. So it's a dirty politics, because what is being conveyed is the unfortunate role is played by the disgruntled opposition in our present system. Because the frustration levels are so high, they help these narratives. What is being told is, because Prime Minister Modi had a lunch with Vivek Agnihotri and gave it an official, the rest of the opposition was against it. They made a statement. And same thing happened to Kashmir. A porter is telling me, because Kashmir Files, I asked him, have you seen the movie? No, because it wasn't released in Kashmir. I said, then why are you, how, on what basis? Everyone is saying, sir. I said, what are they saying? No, because Kashmir Files ke baad halat fir kharab ho gaye. No, what is the connection? Nothing. It's just another narrative.
So what led to the 1990s Exodus?
See, when you look at the Exodus which happened in 1990, there were many precursors to it. And I'll try to cover as many as possible, because 90 happened to be the perfect time for those who were behind it. If you look at pre-1990, the events which were unfolded, first and foremost you have to look at a concept or a doctrine called Ghazwa-e-Hind, which is an Islamic doctrine about converting of whole India into Islamic world. They find India is the missing link. And this I am referring to an article which appeared in India Today when I was a student. It was written in detail how Saudi Arabia was funding it, Iran was funding it, Pakistan was the one which was to act, and Kashmir was the tool, which was the most vulnerable part of India, where it would start from was Kashmir, because Kashmir already had a Muslim majority, large Muslim majority, almost 95% of the population, so it would start from Kashmir. Then there was a Pakistan ISI strategy which was formed during Ziaul Haq's time, and he was the president. Because you have to understand, Pakistan was suffering from a humiliating defeat of 1971 when they lost Bangladesh. And in their psyche, the revenge was not out of it. So they have been trying to seek revenge, and the strategy was of bleeding India by 1,000 cuts. There were first of all, Pakistan was Islamized in 70s through Jamaat Islami. This madrasas mushroomed all over the place. Then India was conceptualized as a snake which has to be killed with 1,000 cuts, and the first two targets were Punjab and Kashmir. So if you remember, the Khalistan movement of 80s was also part of that. Then we go to the next level. Afghanistan was occupied by Soviet Union. They withdrew in 1988-89, and this withdrawal from Afghanistan of Soviet Union was sold to the terrorists, jihadis, mujahids as the victory of Islam. It became a motivating factor. Then Soviet Union broke into various countries in 88 to 91 period, and many of these countries were Islamic countries. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, etc., etc. This was another aspect which was motivating for the terrorist Mujahid factory, again sold as Islam is on the rise, victory of Islam. Then Berlin Wall, if you remember East Germany, West Germany, Berlin Wall also fell in 89. Now these all things were happening just before 1990. Berlin Wall fell in 1989, and the merger of East and West Germany again became a driving force to put across this terrorist factories which were set up in POK, and Afghanistan and Kashmir and Pakistan occupied Kashmir can merge together and become part of Pakistan. So this was another concept sold to them. Then after the withdrawal of Soviet Union, all the forces which were used, trained by ISI with the support of CIA at that time to fight Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, they became idle. So there was a huge infrastructure, and it was very easy to divert that towards Kashmir. And those terrorists were in the second half of 90s, they were infiltrating Kashmir and creating all those massacres. Now, I think I mentioned earlier that in Kashmir slowly things were happening from 84 onwards. Small arms fire, small blasts, but nothing. The government had become inefficient. You go back to 87, there was an election which an accord of Mr. Farooq Abdullah and Rajiv Gandhi, Congress won the election. It was broadly rumored in Kashmir that this election was largely rigged, because prior to that election there was a new party which came into force under the name Muslim United Front, and most of their people lost, and then many of them went to Pakistan and became terrorists. Saeed Salahuddin, who was the head of Hizbul Mujahideen, was the one who lost election in Amir Aqdal constituency, and then he migrated to Pakistan and became a terrorist. In the year 1988-89, if you remember, at the central level in India, we had a period of weak governments, very weak governments. You need to understand Bofors scandal. Post-Bofors, what happened at the central level? First of all, Rajiv Gandhi lost. We had a government headed by VP Singh, which was the worst government. And who was the Home Minister? Mufti Muhammad Saeed from Kashmir. His daughter was kidnapped, and all the terrorists were released. This incident acted as a catalyst for terrorist movement. The terrorists were emboldened, like victory everywhere, because the government in India bent backwards, and all the terrorists were released for their demand. And it's also rumored that she was not actually kidnapped. She was living in a mosque. She was given food. It was only a ploy. So in short, if you look at these events, because of 87 election, you had a disenchanted local population in Kashmir. You had ready availability of terrorists from Pakistan, from Afghanistan. You have very weak governments in center in India. And this, I'm not talking only about VP Singh government. That's 5, 6, 7 years. There were coalition governments, minority governments which couldn't take any decision. Then you had a global environment, which I said, Afghanistan, Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall, breakup, which was very favorable for this. What all these contributed to the Pakistan already had the strategies to do. They were waiting. This was a perfect time. The environment was perfectly suited for them, so they launched it. They launched all that they could in the month of January, and 19th January happened because it had just started before that. And I also believe, that government of J&K state was also hand in glue, because they did nothing for the couple of years now. It was the Farooq Abdullah government, but of course because he was having problems with the center, because there was sort of conflict for a few years. So he also, first of all, they did do nothing. Second, it's reported by that time Deputy Director General of Police that the first batch of terrorists which crossed over from Kashmir to Pakistan, got training, and came back trained and with arms. There were 70 of them which were arrested by the JNK police. They were all caught at the border. But the state government asked for them to be released. And they were the ones who became JKLF and the ones who started the first terrorist activities, killings. I think Yasin Malik was one of them. So it's a whole lot of things which contributed to it. And the last factor which contributed to it was on the day when government of central had become hopeless because weak. They were not able to take decision and state was doing nothing. And the militants, this anti-national campaign which started in Srinagar had reached its peak is when they deputed Jagmohan finally. And it is also said, I've heard this in hush-hush voices, that before Jagmohan would come to Srinagar, Farooq Gupta simply deserted. He went over to London, left the government, resigned and left. It was on 19th itself, 18th or 19th he did that, and there was no government in place. Before that he ordered some raids which added fuel to the fire. And there was the whole population of Kashmir which was actually in revolt that day. And ask a common Kashmiri, including a Pandit or Muslim, it appeared that Kashmir was lost. At that time, it appeared that Kashmir was lost. The strategy was to take over the Radio Kashmir and the Doordarshan in the next day. We have to be thankful to Governor Jagmohan. Within 2 days he took charge. I think 19th or not 19th. 19th he couldn't fly to Kashmir. Probably 20th or 21st reached. And immediately he took charge and some bold steps. And there were many clashes, many killings, but Kashmir was saved. It was a horrible month.
So these led to 1990.
Yes, this is how 1990, January 1990 happened. And we commemorated all over the country, at least our associations, as the Holocaust Day or the Genocide Day. And we'll have a webinar, we are going to have a webinar on this 19 January also.
Okay, with this, I like to conclude here. It was nice hosting you. Thank you for having us here, sir. I guess it was a mystery for me till now, like what had happened in Kashmir. With this podcast, it will help a lot of people to get to know about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.